Thank you for coming for signing into our meeting. I'm Roy Maynard with the Associated News Service. Thank you so much. This is our second Brown Bag J School, where we just get together for about an hour on a Friday at the once a month and just talk about journalism. I like to talk about our best practices, things that we all know or think we know or learned a long time ago and haven't thought about in a while. So our subject today is going to be on the record, off the record, and anonymous sources. What are the best practices? Let's start at the beginning. I'm practicing not reading my slides to you guys. So but I do want to talk about this. Americans' trust the media has plummeted. That's not new. That's been going on for a while. I think that the way that reporters treat anonymous sources and on the record and off the record to a lesser extent has played a big part in this. People don't trust the media, and a lot of it is with good reason. And who's going to restore that trust? I think it's going to fall to outlets like us, groups like us, the Associated News Service, with outlets like you, everybody from the Daily Signal to the Dallas Express and all of our other members. It's going to be up to us. Why? Well, let's start with anonymous sources. And here, I just want to say the New York Times is entirely correct. I completely agree with the New York Times with their policy on anonymous sources. And again, I'll do it just because I have to. They're very specific that anonymous sources should only be used for information that is newsworthy and credible, and that they are not able to report in any other way. Now, that's the exact right policy. We all should have that policy. But let's look at practice. Let's look at the New York Times in practice. And I know that this happened a very long time ago. I think it was 2003, 22 years ago now. But it was important, and I hope that y'all know about this. The Jason Blair incident. Jason Blair was a young reporter. He was a hot shot. He was in all the best parties. He was in all the best publications. The New York Times snapped him up. He didn't have a lot of experience, didn't have a lengthy resume, but he was the hot new property. New York Times picked him up, and for years he just made stuff up. He would quote anonymous sources that because they fed into the supposed quotes from these anonymous sources fed into the left's narrative so well, the New York Times just delightfully published all of it, didn't vet any of it, didn't live up to its own policies on it. And in the end, the executive editor and the managing editor had to resign over this incident. Well-deserved. And I wanted to point out to you the words of the executive editor some years after the incident happened. He says, "I think of Jason Blair as an accident that ended my newspaper career in the same unpredictable way that a heart attack or a plane crash might have." Friends, I do not believe that, and I hope you object to that as well. The Jason Blair incident was not an accident. It was a failure to enforce policy, and that failure came about because they enjoyed the content so much. It fed into their narrative about mean and dumb Republicans so well that no one bothered to check it. That was not an accident. That was planned failure. But it's not just a 20-year-old incident. There was another one, Stephen Glass. I hope y'all are familiar with that one. There was a movie made out of that one with that awful Darth Vader actor called Shattered Glass. But, again, very instructive. But again, it's not stuff that was happening in the past. We're back to it again with the Trump administration. More recent examples. The media is back to the one source anonymous stories that they run with. And often they'll say, well, we ran with it because the allegations were so serious, not because we ran with it because we had confirmation of the anonymous source, or we have so much trust in the source. It was, well, the allegation was serious. Well, that should never be our standard. So what is the right way to go about it? Let me talk to you about my story. I've only used an anonymous source once in my reporting, and that was for a pretty big story that I'll kind of tell you about now. 2017, just as private equity was really starting to make its move into the healthcare sector, Sam Zell's Ardent Investments bought into our regional hospital system, the East Texas Medical Center. Now, ETMC was in trouble. It had had a lot of problems. It had had some scandals. It had been on the block for sale for probably 5 years or so. When it finally got picked up, it got picked up in kind of a weird way. So private equity comes in, they buy out ETMC, they link in with the University of Texas Health System, and they switch it from a nonprofit to a for-profit. The reason you do that is because when you're a for-profit hospital, you pay property taxes and you pay your taxes, but you're not on the hook for the charity care that nonprofits are on the hook for. So Ardent decided, well, it could be cheaper to just pay the taxes. So they put this big deal together. Let me tell you how I heard about it. I was at my local cigar lounge. And if you don't know this yet, the cigar lounge is an awesome place to pick up news tips. You're just sitting around with a bunch of folks, just shooting the breeze. And one of my friends says, I had the most interesting dinner last night. He told me I was at at a restaurant, and my table was next to University of Texas at Tyler president, his table. He said he was a little into his drinks at that moment and was speaking very loudly to his table and was just going on and on about this deal. I don't know what he was talking about, but it sounded pretty interesting. And that was my first indication that ETMC might have a buyer. So I started looking into it. And I had an anonymous source. My anonymous source worked in the ETMC system, knew what was going on, and that became my second. So I had my first news tip, had my anonymous source. I had my anonymous source well documented. Here's when we talked. Here's what we talked about. I had all of his contact information. When I had it all put together, I felt that I needed one more solid confirmation. So I called someone who I knew would know about it. He was a retired or a former Texas State Senator who was on the Board of Regents. And I called him and I said, Senator, here's what I know, or here's what I think I know. Am I right? Now, he could have just hung up. He could have, I was bluffing. I mean, here's what I think I know, really overstated what I believed. But he paused for a moment. He could have hung up. He could have said, I don't want to talk about it, or no comment. But he's always shot straight with me, and I really appreciated at this moment. At this moment, he decided I was close enough and that he would point me in the right direction. He said, yes, I can confirm all of that. This one detail is a little off. It's going to happen in a different order than what you have here. So I corrected that, and I ran it the next Sunday. ETMC immediately denied it, said it was all made up, that it was not going to happen. And of course, the next Friday, they announced the exact thing that I had reported. I was very uncomfortable with just having the one anonymous source. And I would not have gone with that story if I couldn't have corroborated it. And when I corroborated it through the best source I could find. I'll use his name. It's Kevin Eltife, and he is now currently the chairman of the UT Board of Regents. And if it had been any source below that or significantly below that, I might have also not gone with it. But he was such a solid source and so well connected, knew exactly what's going on, that I went with it. Those were my standards. That's the only time that I have ever used an anonymous source, and that's why I was comfortable doing it in that situation. And that's why I'm not completely against anonymous sources now. So let's talk about what are the rules for reporters when it comes to anonymous sources. The very first rule, I honestly believe this, this starts when you're just standing around. Don't make promises, because people are going to want you to make promises to them. If you show up at a meeting or a hearing and you ask a public official, well, tell me what's going on. They're going to want to say something like, well, I'll tell you, but you got to promise me it's off the record. Don't make that promise. In fact, no public official should ever be asking you something like that. We'll talk about that soon. Next, involve your editor early, and that's really important. You cannot be a Jason Blair or a Stephen Glass. You cannot be just out solo on your own, taking these quotes, talking to people. You've got to be able to, somebody in your news organization has to be familiar with what you're doing, who you're talking to, why you're not naming that source, and ultimately who that source is. Your editor needs to know who they are and be able to contact them. Next, in your reporting, I want you to clearly explain your reasons for why the source is anonymous. Sources can be anonymous because they fear retaliation. Sometimes that's very, very serious. Don't let a politician get away with saying, I fear retaliation, so I want to be anonymous on this. If they mean, I don't want the voters to know what I really did or what I really think, that doesn't count. But there are times when they fear retaliation. That's fine. I quoted a man just by first name in Juarez, Mexico last year because, he was fleeing some gang activity and had legitimate fears for not wanting his name to be in there. There are other reasons, but those reasons need to be explained to your reader. Let your reader know, here's why this source is anonymous. Next, corroborate everything. Every fact in there that goes in, I don't care if it's 9 of the facts checked out, so you're going to leave that 10th one unchecked. Don't risk it. Corroborate everything. Everything that anonymous source tells you, make sure that somebody else is corroborating that. Sorry for that. And next, understand their motive. I want to know why that person wants to be anonymous. And I want you to know that. I want you to understand that before you move forward. Tell me why you don't want your name in the paper or in my publication or online. Now it's just, I'm a very private person. Okay, well then we'll find someone else to talk to. Using real names adds so much to your reporting. It adds authenticity. It makes your reader feel better about what they're reading. So when someone wants to go off the record and be an anonymous source, understand their motive, find out why. And then when you do allow it, I want you to keep their contact info, because at some point someone may show up and say, I don't believe that happened. I don't believe that anybody would say that about that issue. I want you to be able to back that up. So that's anonymous sources. Let's move on to on the record and off the record. On the record, this is our factory default setting. We are journalists. We are essentially always on the record. We're always on duty. Let me give you an example. Yeah, let me give you an example. 1989, I know that was a long time ago. I was a very, very young reporter. I was at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and my city editor just happened to get tickets to the World Series game. So he was there with his wife, having a beer, and suddenly the stadium starts shaking. Earthquake, massive earthquake right in the middle of a World Series game. He did what I hope I would do, and what I know all of you would do. He started reporting. He was getting quotes. He was gathering evidence. It doesn't matter that he was on vacation and, at a baseball game 5 states away. What matters is that he's a journalist and he did his job. So let's define some things, and this comes from Poynter, and I like this definition. Poynter is not a bad institution. It is trending towards insufferably woke, but there's still some good material there. I like their definitions of on the record. So off the record means you can't report it. There are different levels of that. On background means that someone will tell you, like, I had a city engineer in Tyler who loved going on background. Potholes are a strange thing to go on background about, but I get it. And I would let him do that if he could just kind of tell me what's going on with, the road plan, for example. Deep background, I've never messed with that. But off the record means you can't report it. Again, know their motives. Here's an example. So at the Tyler paper, we had pretty regular editorial board meetings with our elected officials. Ted Cruz would come in twice a year. The governor, whether it was Abbott or Rick Perry, they'd come in at least once a year. We'd always have the comptroller in. Texas Railroad commissioners would come in. The locals who weren't as used to dealing with the media were always interesting in editorial boards, especially if it was like a candidate's editorial board and they had never been in front of the media before. And we started telling them up front, this is going to be on the record. Everything's on the record. The whole point of us being here is to learn your views. So it's all on the record. But inevitably and invariably, someone or the candidate would want to go off the record. Let's go off the record just for a minute so I can explain it to you. I want you to think about what's really going on when they do that. They're not trying to improve your understanding. They would do that on the record. When they say, let's go off the record so I can explain it to you, they're trying to get you to stop reporting something or not report something or downplay something. They want you to not pay attention to something, and that's a red flag for you. That's when you should say, oh, no, let's talk more about that. And be ready to walk away. If someone says, we got to go off the record, I won't go on the record, we have to go off the record, just say, I'm not going to do that. And this is a waste of my time if it's not on the record. Politicians hate to hear that. They even hate to see the media walking away from them. So that'll usually change their minds. And next, this is really important. Keep your promises. I hope that I have communicated to my children and to younger reporters who have worked for me in the various newsrooms where I've been, that everything that we do is based on our reputations. As a journalist, everything is based on who trusts you and how trustworthy you are. That begins with keeping your promises. As a journalist, your goal is always to underpromise and overdeliver. If your anonymous source wants you to promise that you won't use their name except in the most dire of emergency, keep that promise. If they say, keep my name, quiet, except between you and your editor, that means don't talk about it in the newsroom to all your friends. Keep your promises. Next, always on duty. We kind of covered that. I do believe that we are always on duty. Here's an interesting question. When do we identify ourselves as members of the media? I want to go back to that earthquake at the World Series game. My friend's name was Brian Briggs French. Did Brian tell everybody around him before he sat down, by the way, I'm a reporter. If anything happens, I'll probably quote you? Of course not. But when the earthquake happened and when he looks around, everybody seemed safe. And he could start doing some reporting, and he literally pulled out a notebook from what I understand. Then at that point, it's appropriate to identify yourself as a member of the media. If you're attending a rally, wear a hat, wear a name badge, wear something. Doesn't have to be real bright or flashy. Just be able to say, I'm a member of the media, and I'm not trying to hide that. Next, final thoughts. Now, these come from a site called ethicsandjournalism.org. I found some useful things. Actually, these are only 2 useful things that I found on it. But I like these thoughts. I like these concepts. It begins with, you're a reporter. Once you've identified yourself, everything's on the record. That's your default. That's the default. Everybody should understand that. At the same time, sometimes we're dealing with people that aren't familiar with the media, have never messed with us before. And if you were on our Brown Bag J School last month, you met my reporter, Faith Harper, dear friend. She was the best at this. She would go to a house fire or the site of a robbery or some kind of breaking news, and she could talk to people just to get their reactions, their responses. But she was always really good about explaining to them, now look, I'm with the media. You're saying things right now that you may not want to say for the whole world to hear. Let's go over this again, but bear in mind, I'm a reporter. I always thought that was a good way to handle that. And then finally, always try to keep sources on the record. And then if you do allow a conversation to go off the record in one of those rare circumstances, try to get at the end of it, try to get them to say the same thing on the record. Just say, look, Bob, that didn't sound so bad to me. I think it tells our readers, a lot more about your position. I think you should go on the record with that. A lot of the times after they think about it, they'll say, yeah, okay, I'll go on the record with that. And then there's no problem. A couple of final points that are tangentially related. What do you do when someone says, yes, I'll go on the record, but I want it to be, I want you to send me my quotes before you run them? I'm of 2 minds on this. On quotes, I respectfully say, I'm sorry, we can't do that. That's not something that we do. Blame your editor, blame me, but you say, I'm sorry, my bosses would fire me if I did that. On the other hand, when it's numbers, I do that. When I'm working on a budget story, for example, and I want to make sure that my math is good, I will talk to that budget person and say, will you walk through my numbers with me? They not only appreciate that, they love that. So that's it for this month's Brown Bag J School. I hope y'all have enjoyed this. Jefferson, did we have any questions in the queue?
I'm not seeing any.
If y'all have any questions, just real quick, you can put them in the queue, or you can email me or call me, and we can talk about them offline. No questions? Then, Jefferson, if you'll count us out, thank you all for attending.